The notification came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I almost missed it. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table in my housecoat, half watching a documentary about the polar vortex and half scrolling through a backlog of work emails I'd been avoiding since Friday. My phone buzzed on the table beside my tea mug. I reached for it without thinking. It was a fraud alert from my bank. A purchase attempt of 2,340 had been flagged on my Visa. The merchant code was listed as a travel booking platform. The attempt had been declined because my card didn't have enough available credit. I sat there for a moment trying to make sense of it. I hadn't made any travel bookings. I hadn't tried to buy anything that night. I'd been sitting in my kitchen since 9 o'clock. Then I noticed the timestamp on the declined attempt. 11:32 p.m., 15 minutes ago. Someone had tried to use my card number at 11:32 in the evening, and it had been declined. I set my phone down very carefully on the table, like it might break if I moved too fast. My sister had my card number. Not the physical card, I kept that in my wallet, but the number. She'd borrowed it 8 months earlier to hold a hotel reservation in Niagara Falls for a family trip that ended up not happening. She'd texted me afterwards to say she'd deleted it. I hadn't thought about it again, until now. I called the bank. I canceled the card. I requested a new one with a different number. The woman on the line was efficient and kind in that practiced way that tells you she's walked a lot of people through this particular call at this particular hour. She confirmed that no charges had actually gone through, the decline had saved me, and she noted the incident in my file. "Do you want to flag this as potential fraud?" she asked. I said I wasn't sure yet. She told me to call back if I needed to. I sat in my kitchen until after 1 in the morning, my tea gone cold, the documentary still playing in the background. I kept thinking about that hotel reservation 8 months ago. My sister had asked me if it was all right to put the deposit on my card, and she'd pay me back immediately via e-transfer. She had paid me back, that part was true. She'd done it within the hour. I'd thought that meant the whole transaction was clean, settled, done. I hadn't thought about what would happen if she kept the number. I want to be honest about something before I go further, because I think it matters. My sister and I have always had a complicated relationship, and I say complicated the way people say it when what they really mean is that one person mostly gives and the other mostly takes, and everyone in the family has agreed to call this arrangement just how things are. My sister is 4 years younger than me. She's always been the one our parents worried about in that particular way. The artistic one, the dreamer, the one who never quite got her footing the way the rest of us did. I'm a project manager for a construction firm in Mississauga. I've been saving since I was 22. I have an emergency fund, and I max my TFSA every year, and I own a condo in a neighborhood that was considered boring a decade ago and is now considered smart. I say all of this not to brag, because there's nothing glamorous about 20 years of extremely boring financial discipline, but because it explains why I became the person in the family that things got borrowed from. It started small, $100 here when she was between jobs. A grocery run covered because she was short that week. When she moved into a new apartment, I co-signed because her rental history was thin. I told myself each time that this was what family did. I told myself that if the situation were reversed, she would do the same for me. I'm not sure I actually believed that last part. She'd been in a relationship for 2 years with a guy I'll call her boyfriend. I don't want to use his name. And he was, at best, not a good influence on her spending habits, and, at worst, someone who had figured out that my sister had access to a responsible older sibling who could be counted on to catch her when she fell. He worked in sales and wore a lot of cologne and had a very expensive taste in restaurants for someone who always seemed to be between paychecks. Once, at my parents' place for Easter dinner, I watched him spend 45 minutes explaining to my dad why cryptocurrency was the smartest investment of the decade. And I had this feeling I couldn't shake for the rest of the evening, this low-grade hum at the back of my skull that said, "Watch yourself." But I didn't say anything, because she was happy, and she was my sister, and our mother would have been devastated if I'd made trouble. Back to November. Back to my kitchen table, and my canceled card, and the feeling sitting in my chest that I can only describe as a key turning in a lock. The slow mechanical understanding that I had been careless in a way that I was going to have to deal with. I didn't call her that night. I waited until the next morning, Wednesday before work. I sent her a text. It said, "Hey, got a fraud alert on my Visa last night. Someone tried to charge $2,340 to a travel booking site. I canceled the card. Do you know anything about this?" She didn't respond until noon. Her response was, "Oh no, that's awful. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Did the bank catch it?" That was it. No other context, no volunteered information. I typed back, "Yes, it was declined. I just wanted to check in case you recognize the amount or the merchant. The last time someone else had my card number was when you used it for the Niagara Hotel deposit." The 3 little dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "I deleted that. I would never do something like that. I can't believe you're even suggesting it." And there it was. I hadn't accused her. I had asked a question that any reasonable person in my position would ask, and she had turned it into an accusation and herself into a victim before I'd had a chance to say another word. I put my phone in my desk drawer and didn't touch it for the rest of the workday. I want to tell you what the next 2 weeks were like, but I also want to be careful not to lose the thread of what was actually happening, because it unfolded in layers, and each layer was worse than the last. Layer 1. My sister told my mother that I had accused her of stealing from me. My mother called me that evening. She was not angry exactly. My mother rarely does angry in a direct way. She was hurt. She was wounded. She asked me if I understood how much damage it did to a family to throw around accusations without proof. She told me that my sister had been through a lot lately, and that she didn't need me adding to her stress. She asked me if I'd thought about what it would do to our relationship if I kept pursuing this. I asked her what I was supposed to do when someone tried to use my credit card without my knowledge. She said that I didn't know for certain that it was my sister. I said that I'd had no other unauthorized users of my card number. She said I could have been hacked by anyone. I didn't say what I wanted to say, which was that the timing, the merchant, the amount, all of it together was not a coincidence, and she knew it as well as I did. I didn't say it because I was tired, and because I knew that anything I said that sounded like a counter-argument would be re-reported to my sister as more evidence of my cruelty. I said I would think about it. I hung up. Layer 2. My sister's boyfriend messaged me on Instagram. I don't follow him. I've never followed him. He sent me a DM, which means he had to search for my account. The message said, and I'm paraphrasing because I deleted it, that I needed to understand that my sister was really struggling right now, that she was in a vulnerable place, and that going after her like this was causing her real harm. He said he knew the kind of person I was, and he'd been watching me treat her like a charity case for years, and that she was worth more than that. I read it twice. Then I thought about what he'd just told me without meaning to, that he'd been watching how I treated my sister for years, that he'd been paying attention to the money, that he knew enough about our financial relationship to comment on it in any direction. I screenshotted the message before I deleted it. Layer 3. My brother-in-law, my other sister's husband, the one I actually get along with, texted me to check in, not to take sides, just to ask how I was doing. It was a short message, just a few sentences, but it was the first time anyone in my family had asked me that since all of this started, and I had to put my phone down for a minute because I wasn't prepared for how much it would get to me. He said, "For what it's worth, you had every right to ask the question. That was enough. I needed that more than I can explain." By the third week, I had decided to look more carefully at my financial records. I went back through my last 2 years of statements. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I think I was looking for the shape of things, some pattern that I could hold up to the light and understand. What I found was this. In 22 months, I had transferred a total of $4,780 to my sister through e-transfer. Some of it was loans that she'd said she'd repay. Most of it had never come back. There was also the co-signed lease, which had 3 months remaining and which I was still technically liable for if she stopped paying rent. There was a $400 payment I'd made to her dentist when she had an emergency extraction and didn't have coverage. There was a grocery order I'd placed to her address in the spring when she'd told me her bank account was frozen pending a dispute. I made a spreadsheet. I do this because I'm that kind of person. I put every number in a row, and I looked at the total at the bottom, and I thought about what I'd done with that money if I'd put it in my TFSA instead. Then I closed the laptop and made myself a bowl of pasta and watched half an episode of something I don't even remember now, because I needed my brain to stop calculating for an hour. The fraud attempt was 2,340s, the lifetime total was 4,780s. The numbers didn't match, and I was glad they didn't, because if they had matched, I think it would have broken something in me that I wasn't sure I could put back together. I didn't go to the police. I thought about it. I spent a week thinking about it. What I kept coming back to was that the fraud attempt had been declined. No money had actually left my account, and what I would have to do to press charges was sit across from a detective and explain my whole family dynamic and the co-signed lease and the hotel deposit and the boyfriend with his DMs, and then watch it get filed somewhere and probably amount to nothing, and do all of that while my mother called me asking why I was trying to destroy my own sister. What I did instead was call a lawyer. Just one consultation, just to understand where I stood. She was very matter-of-fact, which I appreciated. She told me the fraud attempt was documented by the bank and could be used as evidence if I ever needed it. She told me I could send a formal demand letter regarding the outstanding transfers, which would have no guaranteed outcome but would create a paper trail. She told me that since I was a co-signer on the lease, I should contact the building management company directly to understand my liability and my options for having my name removed when the lease came up for renewal. I left her office on a clear afternoon in December and stood on the sidewalk outside her building for a moment, just breathing cold air. It smelled like exhaust, and someone's cigarette from half a block away, and that particular wet concrete smell that comes before a Toronto snowfall. I'd thought going to a lawyer would feel like an escalation. Instead, it felt like standing on solid ground for the first time in a month. I didn't send the demand letter, not yet. What I did was something smaller, and in some ways harder. I called my sister, not because I'd forgiven her. I want to be clear about that. I called her because I'd spent 38 years in a relationship with her, and I thought I owed us both one direct conversation before I decided what came next. I called her on a Sunday afternoon, and she answered after 2 rings, and her voice was careful in a way that told me she'd been expecting this call. I told her I wasn't calling to fight. I told her I wasn't calling to accuse her. I told her that I had done an accounting of the money that had moved between us over the past 2 years, and that it was more than I'd realized, and that I needed her to know I was aware of the number. I told her that the fraud attempt was in my bank's records and that it was documented, and that I wanted her to understand that I knew that too. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I checked my phone to see if the call had dropped. Then she said, "I didn't mean for things to get this bad. It wasn't a confession, it wasn't an apology. It was just that sentence, and I turned it over in my mind for the rest of the day trying to find the bottom of it. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. Things had been happening, apparently, that could get bad, and she had been aware of them. I let that sit where it was. I told her I was going to have my name removed from the co-signed lease when it came up. I told her I wasn't in a position to help with finances the way I had been. I told her that I hoped she found her footing. I meant all of it. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Mum is going to be upset." She said, "I know." We didn't say much after that. We stayed on the phone for maybe 2 more minutes, filling the space with small talk that didn't mean anything, and then we said goodbye in the way you do when you're not sure what you're saying goodbye to. The next few months were not dramatic. That's the part that surprised me, a little. I'd expected fallout, more calls from my mother, a family dinner where everything was terrible, some kind of scene. There was some of that. My mother went through a period of cool politeness that I recognized as her version of disappointment, and I lived with it the way you live with a weather system, waiting for it to pass. My sister and I did not speak for 2 months, and when we did speak again, it was brief and careful and nothing like it used to be. But I also noticed other things. I noticed that my bank balance was doing something I hadn't expected, simply staying where I put it. I noticed that my phone felt lighter somehow, less charged, like a cord that had been quietly draining something was now unplugged. I noticed that I slept better, which I hadn't anticipated and couldn't entirely explain. At some point in February, I sat down and looked at my TFSA. I'd made my annual contribution in January the way I always did. The number on the screen was the highest it had ever been. I don't tell this part of the story to make a point about money. Money was not really the point. The money was the shape that the real problem had taken, the form it had worn when it needed to be visible. The real problem was something older and more shapeless, something about what I had decided family meant, and what I thought I owed the people who shared my last name, and what I thought I deserved in return. I had been doing arithmetic in my head for years and never letting myself see the sum. I think about a conversation I had with a coworker around that time, someone I've known for 6 years, someone I trust in that particular way you trust people you've sat next to in difficult project meetings for half a decade. She'd been through something different but adjacent, a long friendship that had slowly drained her of things she hadn't noticed she was giving. She said something that I've thought about almost every week since. She said, "The hardest part isn't ending something. The hardest part is realizing it ended a long time ago and you just kept showing up anyway." I'm 39 years old. I've spent most of my adult life being the responsible one, which is a role that no one asks you if you want, and that comes with very little gratitude and a great deal of being taken for granted. I'm not bitter about it, or I'm trying not to be, which might be the more honest thing to say. I understand that I made choices. Every transfer, every co-signed document, every time I answered the phone and said yes instead of no. Those were my choices, and I have to own them. What I don't have to do is keep making the same ones. This past spring, my lease came up. I'd been thinking for a while about whether I wanted to stay in my condo or whether it was time to look at buying something. I'd been avoiding it because buying felt big and I'd told myself I wasn't ready, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was waiting to feel ready for. A mortgage broker I know casually through work, we'd crossed paths on a couple of projects, asked me once how I'd feel about talking through my numbers with her over coffee, no obligation, just to see where I stood. I said yes. I sat across from her in a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning in March, and she looked at my savings and my income and my credit score, which was excellent despite everything, and she said words I hadn't expected to hear, that I was in a genuinely strong position, that I'd been building toward this even when I wasn't thinking of it that way, that a pre-approval was absolutely within reach. I drove home through that particular early spring Toronto gray, the city still deciding whether it was going to snow or not. And I thought about all the years I'd spent catching someone else so I could avoid thinking too hard about where I was standing. I'm not there yet. But I know where I'm standing now. My sister and I are in contact. It's polite, it's occasional. It is nothing like what I used to think a sister relationship was supposed to be, and I grieve that in quiet moments, in ways I don't fully have words for. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she made a series of decisions that she told herself were smaller than they were, and I think she had help making those decisions from someone who knew exactly what he was doing. I don't know what will happen to them. I've stopped keeping track. My mother has found her way back to something warmer with me. We don't talk about any of this directly, which is probably its own kind of loss, but we talk about other things, and there is warmth in it again, and I'll take warmth. I still have the screenshots of the DMs. I keep them in a folder on my phone the same way you keep an umbrella in your trunk. Not because you expect rain every day, but because you'd rather be the kind of person who was prepared. My new credit card number is different. I don't share it with anyone. And on the morning I got the pre-approval letter, I sat in my car in the parking lot outside my office and read it 3 times, and then I called my brother-in-law, because of everyone. He would understand what it meant, and I told him, and he laughed and said, "That's bloody brilliant, well done you." And I sat there for another 5 minutes after I hung up with the sun coming through the windshield in that specific way it does in early spring in Ontario, thin but present, promising something, and I thought, yeah, this is mine.